back again, and we are talking about verb groups and how to determine what is the structure of a given verb group. Every single sentence in English is comprised of a subject and a predicate. Within the predicate you have the verb phrase, and within every verb phrase you have a verb group, even if it's only comprised of a single verb. So even if you have the baby cried, cried is the only verb in the sentence, therefore it's the complete verb group, it's also the complete verb phrase, the complete predicate of the sentence, and it forms a sentence with the subject, the baby. So let's go through a bunch of examples where we have many different types of verb groups, and we'll see how to tell them apart from each other. So for example, you could have something like John could have written a note to Lisa. John could have written a note to Lisa. So first thing you want to know is, what is my subject? And the sentence is about John, right? This is the topic of the sentence. This is the person that we're giving information about. So we next look for possible verbal material, and we see could, yes. It's a modal verb in the past tense. Have, we know that that can be the perfect. Written, aha, the en of the past participle. Then we get to this note, and then we start seeing, this doesn't look like a verb. Is not a verb, no is not a verb, to is not a verb, Lisa is not a verb. So all of this material over here is not functioning as a unit of the verb group, only this material is. And if we were analyzing this sentence in terms of the structure of the verb phrase, we would be thinking about what are the phrases within the predicate that determine that you have a monotransitive, or you have a ditransitive, or you have an intransitive. So we would be looking at a note and to Lisa. And notice that when you say John could have written a note to Lisa, excuse me, the thing that is written is a note, therefore a note is the direct object, and to Lisa, that expresses the intended recipient of the note. Therefore to Lisa is the indirect object. So whenever you have a direct object and an indirect object, you know you have ditransitive. And you can always test that by seeing whether you can have the other possible word order for ditransitives. So you can say John could have written a note to Lisa, but you also could have said John could have written Lisa a note, where you have the indirect object first, followed by the direct object. Okay, so that would all be if we were looking at the structure of the verb phrase. And right now we're not looking at the structure of the verb phrase because we're just looking at the structure of the verb group. So on this part of the assignments that I'm going to ask you to do, and this part of the exams, I will only be asking you to analyze the verb group itself. So in other words, could have written. You want to know what's going on with respect to could have written. The main verb is going to be always the last verb, which is here written. And you know, because it's en, it's unambiguously the past participle form, which we know is just a form, doesn't mean anything. And we have, of course, over on the left side, all of our auxiliary verbs. So we're looking to see, how do we classify these auxiliary verbs? Could, we know, is a type of modal, so we're going to label it as modal. Since it has the d at the end, we also know that it is a form of the past tense. So we're going to put this past tense label under the modal. Have, we know 100%, there's no question about it, it doesn't have the possibility of being anything other than perfect, right? So this is going to be perfect. So in other words, the sentence is past modal perfect. Past modal perfect. That would be the label that we would give to a sentence such as this. And I could ask you, okay, what is a sentence that appears in the past modal perfect? And you would give me an example like this, or any other example that appears with those three things, the past, the modal, and the perfect. So let's continue talking about different structures so that we see what the different possibilities are. And remember that in English, what is always going to be the case? When you have an auxiliary verb, you always have a certain sequence of auxiliary verbs. So it's always modal, perfect, progressive, passive. You can never have anything other than that order. So let's look at our next example. If you have the bosses had been arrested at 5 o'clock. So the bosses had been arrested at 5 o'clock. The bosses had been arrested at 5 o'clock. So first thing that you note is that your subject here is the bosses. We're going to forget about this and concentrate on what are the verbs of this sentence. So, had been arrested at 5 o'clock. Excuse me, this is the predicate of the sentence, and what we want to see is what within this predicate is a verb and what is not a verb, it's something else. So had looks like it's a verb because it's appearing in the past tense. We know that it could be the perfect form. Been, again, looks like a verb because it's appearing with the en, the past participle form. So that's going to be included in the verb group. Arrested, this also looks like it could be a verb because it's got the ed at the end, required by the verb be that occurs before it. And then we get to this at 5 o'clock, and then we start thinking, okay, added, adding. You know, you can say that, but then it would be adding. Right? It would be a different verb. Added. So at, the preposition, right, doesn't take the progressive, doesn't take the past tense. It doesn't do any of the things that we think of a verb as being able to do. Therefore, it is not a verb. It is a preposition, and 5 o'clock is the complement of the preposition. It tells you at what time, specifies the time. So at 5 o'clock could have been left out. We could have just said the bosses had been arrested, and that's it. That's the end of the sentence. So we're going to completely forget about at 5 o'clock. It's not going to play any role in our analysis. So what do we want to do in terms of the analysis? We want to think about what is happening with our verb group. So verb group is made up of had been arrested. How do we know that arrested is not serving as an adjective here, though? Because remember, we've seen examples where you have the verb be and then you have an adjective following it, and it's functioning to describe the subject of the sentence. So what tells us whether we do have that or we have something different from that? Remember the intensifier test. So if you use very, the bosses had been very arrested at 5 o'clock. Right? That sounds weird. I mean, if you're arrested, you're arrested. It's not really like there's an extent to which you can be arrested. You're either arrested or you're not arrested. So the fact that we cannot have the intensifier, very, occurring before this item makes it look like this item is not a modifier, is not an adjective, and is thus, therefore, a verb. So verb group comprised of main verb, arrested, and then the auxiliary verbs had. We know it automatically has to be the perfect. That's the only thing that had could ever be. And we also know that we have a past tense marker here. So this guy is going to be in the past tense. Then, notice what's happening here is that we have two pieces here, right? We have the be part and then we have the en part. The en part tells us it's past participle because had precedes it. The be part lets us think that, well, we might have passive or we might have progressive. If we have ing following it, it's going to be progressive. If we have en or ed following it, it's going to be passive. So we have to look to see, aha, arrested. Yes, this is the past participle, therefore it's passive. Be plus the past participle is always passive. So this guy is passive, and remember, nothing except the first verb in the sequence takes a label of tense, because the first verb in any sequence of verbs is always the one that shows the marking for the tense. It's the unique item that shows that marking. So what if we have a sentence like, those investigators might be inquiring about that issue. Those investigators might be inquiring about that issue. This is legible. I'm assuming that it's at least facing in the right direction, so I think that's gonna hopefully increase the legibility of it, but if it's not legible, please let me know, okay? Because I can try to do something to improve the setup if the examples aren't clear. So, first thing is, get rid of your subject. You want all and only the verbs of the sentence. Those investigators is your subject. It's what the sentence is about. And the predicate, therefore, is going to be everything else in the sentence. So we've got might be inquiring about that issue. So what's going on there? Might be inquiring about that issue. Well, we have several items here that look like they could be verbs. Might is a modal with past form. Be is definitely a type of verb. Inquiring, what's going on here? Aha, ing, that makes it look like a verb too. So by all of the tests that we have for verbs in terms of what forms they can take, it looks like these three guys are going to function as verbs. And then we have this about. So those investigators might be inquiring abouting that issue, right? That's not possible. You can't add anything to the end of the word about. So it's not a verb. It is, in fact, of course, we know, a preposition. Taking that issue, the noun phrase that issue, as its complement. So, in other words, it is not part of the verb group. We don't care about it now. If we were trying to determine what type of verb phrase we have, then we would be taking that into consideration. But since we are not doing that right now, we're going to ignore that. So just looking at the verb group, you have might be, well, I can't read it, so I don't know how you can read it. Those investigators might be inquiring. Okay, those investigators might be inquiring. I hope you guys can read this. So, your main verb is going to be inquiring. Why? Because it's the last verb in the sequence. It appears in ing. And why is it appearing in ing? Because it has preceding it the auxiliary verb be, which we therefore know is the progressive. So, going back to our auxiliaries, we're going to give the label of ox for all of them, and then divide up into two groups. We know that might is one of those modals, so might, may, can, should, would, could, all of those guys fall into the class of modals. What is interesting about those is that they have to occur first. So whenever you're thinking to yourself, okay, this might be a modal, I'm not sure if it's a modal, always do the test of if you mix it with other auxiliaries, does it occur first? And then that will tell you that it is, if your answer is yes. So we know that we have the past tense form here, because we have the t on might, and then we have be, which is pairing up with the ing of the following verb to give you the progressive. It's not passive, because if you had en or ed here, then you would have the past participle, and it would be passive, but you have ing, therefore it's progressive. So we would say that this sentence is past modal progressive. That's the form of the sentence. And that form is always determined only by all the material in the verb group. Nothing else is ever going to matter in terms of deciding what type of sentence you have. So, what if we have an example like, the children who Paul had invited to the party might be playing baseball outside. The children who Paul had invited to the party might be playing outside. So what's going on here? First thing you want to do is know what is the subject of the sentence. You want to eliminate the subject of the sentence. And in this example, we have a subject that is rather large, right? Because if we think about it, the children who Paul had invited to the party might be playing outside. We might think, okay, the subject is going to be the children, because that is who the sentence is about. However, if we look at the rest of the material here, after that material, we see that that is actually providing more information about the children. So the children who Paul had invited to the party, this whole thing Paul had invited to the party is telling you which children we're talking about. The ones that Paul had invited to the party, not the ones that he didn't invite. So this material itself is actually a mini sentence because we have a subject, Paul had invited verb group to the party, prepositional phrase, but it's all playing the role of modifying the subject. So it's all inside the subject. All of this material falls within inside the subject. And because it's inside the subject, we're going to completely disregard it. Even though we know that if we were to look inside the subject, we would see a verb group there because we have these items like had invited, and we know that that's going to be a verb group. But we're going to forget about it because it's inside the subject. So we're going to look at the verb group, in other words, only of the main clause, what we call the main clause, which is the primary clause of the sentence. So we say might be playing outside. And then we look at might and we say, yes, looks like the past modal might. We're very familiar with that. We've got be, looks like some sort of auxiliary verb, maybe a passive, maybe a progressive. Playing, aha, ing, looks like it's progressive with the be. And then outside we know is not a verb. We cannot do anything with outside that we can do with verbs. So whatever it is, it's something other than a verb. Therefore, we're going to get rid of it. It is not going to play a role in determining the type of verb group that we have. So the thing that we have to look at here is only might be playing. That is the only material in the sentence that is going to be relevant to talking about what's going on with the verb group structure. So you have verb group comprised of playing, ing form. Why does that make sense here? Because you have preceding it the verb be. So in other words, you know it's another instance of progressive. And on your left, you're going to have your auxiliary verbs divided up into, in this instance, modal, which is in the past tense form. And then be is serving as the progressive marker with ing. So this would be a past modal progressive sentence. The label that you would give this would be past modal progressive. And so let's look at several more examples, and then I'll give you a bunch of sentences to hand in for the exercise that we do on Sunday. And as you guys do that, if you have questions, if you want to show me the work that you're doing so far, if you want to go over things, just send me and I'll give you some feedback on that, okay? So what if you have the sentence, Paula appears confident? Paula appears confident. So what's happening here, if we were looking at this sentence in terms of the type of VP, we would know that we would be dealing with what? An intensive VP, because confident is describing Paula. In other words, confident is serving as the subject predicative, the subject complement. And so in that instance, we know if you're a subject complement, you cannot be a verb, right? You have to be either an adjective phrase, a noun phrase, a prepositional phrase, something like that. So that is telling us that already confident is not part of this verb group. It is not an instance of a verb. And if you wanted to just confirm that, you could see, well, can I intensify it? And then you would say, Paula appears very confident. Aha, Paula appears extremely confident. So that's showing you that when you add the intensifier before confident, it is possible. Therefore, again, it's not a verb. So what is then going to be our verb? Well, just getting rid of the subject leaves us with only appears. So that is our complete verb group. Notice that when we have a verb group comprised of just a single word, you still need to provide all of the levels of structure for the verb group. So the verb group is going to lead up to the verb phrase. You're going to have the verb phrase at the topmost level, then the verb group, then the verb, and then the tense label. So the verb here appears, present tense. So how would we label this sentence? Present. Finished. Period. That's it. Okay, let's say something like, what if we had a sentence like, those candles could become dirty? those candles could become dirty. Those candles could become dirty. So what's happening here? Again, identify the subject, get rid of it, eliminate it from the sentence. It's not going to make any difference. Those candles, because those is modifying candles. Those is a determiner that is giving you information about the noun candles. So as the subject, we're going to forget about it. And then we have this could, a type of the modal verb, past tense because we have D here. And then become, could it be a verb? Could it be an adjective? Let's do some tests to see. What about dirty? Could it be a verb? Could it be an adjective? You think about what is dirty telling us in this sentence. Those candles could become dirty. It's telling you the state of being in which the candles might find themselves. In other words, it's functioning to modify those candles. And because we know those candles is a noun phrase, because it's the subject of the sentence, we know that dirty is an adjective. It's an adjective phrase modifying the subject. So in other words, it's similar to the last structure that we looked at. It's an intensive verb phrase. So dirty, in other words, is not part of our verb group. It's not a verb. Notice that you can use dirty as a verb. So you can say, they dirtied their hands. In that sentence, they dirtied their hands. Why is a dirty serving as a verb? Because you have the past tense marker, dirtied. They dirtied their hands. The whole verb group in that sentence would be just comprised of the word dirty. So you have verb phrase, verb group, verb, past, and then dirty. That would be the complete analysis. Okay, so depending on the sentence, I know I keep saying this over and over. I think I sound like a broken record, but I want to really emphasize it. Depending on the sentence in which you find the word, that word could be doing something very different. So always look relative to that sentence, how was that guy functioning? So those candles could become, and we're thinking about could become as potentially being the verb group here. How do we know become is a verb or maybe something else? Well, what if we did the intensifier test? So we use very here. Those candles could very become. Or those candles could very become dirty. That doesn't seem to work very well, right? So, since we can't have an intensifier, the logic is that we don't have something that's a modifier, like an adjective, we therefore have a verb. So our verb group is could become, comprised of just the two pieces, could and become. We know that could is a modal because why? Because it ends in ud. So you have should, would, could, right? That's one way to think about what the modal verbs are. And all of their present tense counterparts, can, shall, will, etc. And we know it's in the past form because we have that D at the end. So the label that you would have for this sentence would be past modal. The sentence is in the past modal tense. That's the tense that we have here. So let's look at one more example. What if you had something like the students peered into the limestone cave? So the students peered into the limestone cave. So first thing, let's isolate our subject. Who is this sentence about? What is the sentence about? What's the topic? Is the students. So that's going to be your subject, and you're going to want to get rid of that guy immediately. Peered into the limestone cave. Interestingly, what do we have here? This preposition into. So this guy is telling us information about spatial location, and therefore it's a typical type of preposition. And notice that you can't have the sentence without this. So you can't say, the students peered the limestone cave. You know, you might be able to figure out what it would mean if somebody were to say that to you, but it sounds like a really weird sentence of English if you don't have the preposition there. And And that is because we know here is a type of prepositional verb, so it requires a prepositional verb group to follow. Sorry, prepositional phrase. I'm really getting tired of it. It requires a prepositional phrase to follow it, okay, which is the prepositional complement of the verb. So that's talking about things in terms of the level of the verb phrase. Now, just looking at the verb group, what's going on? You have appeared showing up in something that looks like the past tense, the ed. And we said into the limestone cave is this prepositional complement. It is not part of the verb group. It is not consisting of anything that is a verb. So, appeared itself is the verb phrase, the verb group, the verb, and it is in the past tense. So that is the complete structure that you would have for the verb appeared in this example. I'm going to, as I mentioned, give you a lot of other examples that you can work on so that you just practice, and after you go through 20, 30, 40, 50 of these sentences, it's going to be very natural and fast for you to give the labels. It's just a matter of going through it several times again and again. So I will set up that exercise for you that will be due on the coming Sunday. Any questions, any doubts? If you want to check, you're working on something and you're not sure about it, a question that you want to ask, please get in touch with me, let me know. And we will be talking to you soon. Take care, guys.